What really happened in the final moments? We've always imagined the moon as a silent, motionless world, unchanged through time. But what if I told you that just a few days ago, a massive human-made metal object came hurtling through space at thousands of kilometers per hour and slammed into the surface of the moon? What's even more surprising is that this wasn't a crashed spacecraft at all. It was the discarded upper stage of a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket, one that had once successfully carried a lunar mission into space. Why did that rocket never make its way back to Earth? Why couldn't it be controlled anymore? And was this impact just an isolated incident, or is it a serious warning for the future of space exploration? Today, we're uncovering the story of an extraordinary event, one that shattered the moon's silence and forced the entire space community to confront a new set of questions. August 5th, 2026. Space observation centers around the world were all focused on a single point in space. It wasn't a new lunar spacecraft, and it wasn't an asteroid either. It was the abandoned upper stage of a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket. After successfully sending 2 private lunar missions into space in 2025, that rocket stage never made a controlled return to Earth. Month after month, it continued to drift as the combined gravity of the Earth and the Moon gradually altered its trajectory. Eventually, scientists confirmed there was no longer any way to avoid the collision. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Traveling at tremendous speed, the object slammed into the lunar surface near the Einstein crater. Even though no one on Earth witnessed the impact firsthand, its consequences immediately sparked intense discussion throughout the space science community. But the most important question still remained unanswered. How did the rocket from a successful mission end up crashing into the moon? And that answer is what transforms this story from a seemingly ordinary accident into a far deeper mystery. At the center of this story is SpaceX's Falcon 9, one of the most reliable and widely used orbital launch rockets in operation today. Countless satellites, critical cargo missions to the International Space Station, and even human spaceflights have all been launched aboard this rocket. But this time, it's not Falcon 9's remarkable success that's making headlines. It's the rocket's abandoned upper stage. Verified fact: in 2025, this upper stage successfully delivered Firefly Aerospace's Blue Ghost and InSpace's Resilience lunar missions onto their planned trajectories toward the moon. Once its job was done, the upper stage was never designed to return to Earth. With most of its propellant depleted, it was left drifting through deep space in an uncontrolled orbit. At first, nothing about it seemed unusual. After all, this kind of situation had happened before. But over time, the trajectory calculations began to change. Researchers noticed that the upper stage was gradually drifting onto a path whose final destination could be the moon. But here's the real question. Was this truly the fate of such an advanced space rocket all along? Or was there a decision made somewhere along the way, one whose consequences no one could have imagined? This is where the story begins to take a much deeper turn. At first, it was nothing more than a possibility. The orbits of abandoned rocket stages naturally evolve over time in space, so many early predictions never actually come true. But by the middle of 2026, the situation began to change. Independent orbital analysts and multiple space research teams compared their calculations one after another and reached the same conclusion: that Falcon 9's upper stage would no longer be able to avoid the moon. The combined gravitational pull of the Earth, the moon, and the sun gradually altered its trajectory until a collision became almost inevitable. Verified fact: the estimated time and location of the impact had been predicted in advance. Just as predicted, on August 5th, 2026, the object struck the lunar surface near Einstein crater. Follow-up observations were also consistent with the predicted impact. But this is where a new question emerges. If scientists already knew the collision was going to happen, was there anything they could have done to prevent it? Or, once it was left in space, was this massive rocket stage no longer under anyone's control? The answer to that question reveals the reality behind what really happened. That naturally raises an important question. Could SpaceX have brought this rocket stage back to Earth if it had wanted to? The answer is technical, but it's also where the real story behind this entire event begins to unfold. Verified fact: the Falcon 9 upper stage is responsible for delivering a spacecraft into its intended orbit or onto its trajectory toward the Moon. On this mission, it successfully placed Blue Ghost and Resilience onto their planned translunar trajectories toward the Moon. But once that job was finished, the rocket stage no longer had enough propellant to return to Earth or maneuver itself into a safer orbit. As a result, the rocket stage became nothing more than an inactive object in space. It could no longer receive commands, nor did it have the ability to change its own trajectory. From that point on, it was the combined gravity of the Earth, the Moon, and the Sun that determined its future path. But this raises another uncomfortable question. If an outcome like this could be anticipated, then why wasn't there a backup plan for the future? And that question brings us to the most dramatic moment of the entire story, the day the Moon's silence was finally broken. August 5th, 2026. In the distant sky above the Moon, there were no flames to be seen and no explosion to be heard. Even so, that day will stand apart in the history of space exploration, because a massive human-made metal structure was about to reach the end of its journey for the very last time. Verified fact: SpaceX's abandoned Falcon 9 upper stage struck the Moon at high speed near the Einstein crater region. At the moment of impact, it was traveling at several kilometers per second, so fast that the metal structure was completely destroyed in an instant, sending an enormous amount of lunar dust and rock fragments flying in every direction. But no one on Earth was able to witness the event directly. That's because the collision occurred in a region of the Moon where it couldn't be observed directly in real time. Even so, the event didn't go unnoticed. Verified fact: South Korea's Danuri, KPLO, lunar orbiter, operating in orbit around the Moon, collected images of the impact region taken both before and after the collision. These observations gave researchers the opportunity to analyze the newly formed crater and the changes in the lunar dust created by the impact. Later on, data from other lunar observation missions also played an important role in this analysis. This event was no longer just the final journey of a rocket. It brought renewed attention to the future of abandoned objects in space, the growing pace of human activity on the Moon, and the urgent challenge of protecting the space environment. But the most surprising part wasn't the impact itself. It was the subtle clues researchers uncovered afterward. And that's where the mystery became even deeper. A rocket hitting the Moon might sound like a simple event, but what truly captured scientists' attention was not the impact itself. It was the information the collision left behind. Verified fact: the Moon has virtually no atmosphere. That means there is no wind, no rain, and no rivers. That is why a newly formed crater and the dust scattered around it can remain almost unchanged for a very long time. As a result, every such collision becomes a kind of natural laboratory for researchers. The Danuri orbiter, along with future observations from missions like NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, LRO, can study this new crater and collect more precise information about the Moon's surface structure, dust distribution, and the effects of high-speed impacts. But behind this scientific opportunity, there is also an uncomfortable reality hidden beneath the surface. If humans establish permanent bases on the Moon in the future, could uncontrolled space debris like this become a new source of risk? And it was this very question that sparked discussions at an international level. After the lunar impact, the main goal of the investigation was not just to determine where the collision occurred, but to understand why this situation happened and how it could be prevented in the future. Verified fact. Various space research teams had already analyzed the rocket's trajectory, the timing of the collision, its speed, and the possible impact location. After the impact, researchers compared those predictions with the actual observational data. The results showed that the rocket's predicted trajectory was largely accurate. After that, the focus of the discussion shifted to post-mission disposal planning. In low Earth orbit, many rocket stages can be intentionally guided back into Earth's atmosphere, where they burn up and are destroyed in a controlled manner. But for missions traveling toward the moon or into deep space, the situation becomes far more complicated. Carrying extra fuel reduces the efficiency of a mission, but without enough fuel, a rocket stage can no longer change its own trajectory. This event, therefore, is not just about SpaceX. It has raised an important question for all future deep space missions. As more and more government and private missions head toward the moon, one important question remains. Who is ultimately responsible for the rockets and spacecraft left behind in space? And in the search for answers to this question, multiple theories, debates, and discussions about future policies began to emerge. There is little disagreement among experts about the basic facts of the Falcon 9 upper stage impact on the moon. But when it comes to what this event actually means, opinions begin to differ. Verified fact. The rocket successfully completed its primary mission. After that, with insufficient fuel remaining, it could no longer change its own trajectory and eventually impacted the moon. According to the information currently available, this was not the result of a technical explosion or a launch failure. Expert opinion. Many space experts believe that as the number of lunar missions increases in the future, the risk of uncontrolled impacts like this could also grow. That is why future deep space missions will require more advanced post-mission disposal strategies, long-term orbital planning, and greater international coordination. Another perspective, some researchers, however, believe that compared to the moon's enormous surface area, the risk of such impacts is still very limited. Therefore, the current situation should not be viewed as an immediate crisis, but rather as something that needs to be considered as part of future planning. What remains uncertain? There is still no public evidence showing that this impact damaged any active infrastructure or spacecraft from future lunar missions. So the question is, if this was simply the final journey of an abandoned rocket, why did it spark so much discussion around the world? The answer lies in one of the deepest contradictions of human space exploration. The greatest mystery behind this event is not the rocket itself, but our future. Just a few years ago, the number of active missions on the moon was extremely limited. But now, the situation is changing rapidly. The United States, China, India, Japan, Europe, and a growing number of private companies are carrying out new missions around the moon. At the same time, the number of human-made objects in lunar orbit and on the moon's surface is also increasing. Verified fact. The 2026 Falcon 9 upper stage impact has once again raised an important question. How will abandoned rocket stages be managed over the long term after deep space missions come to an end? The most surprising part is that while international guidelines exist for sending spacecraft into space, a complete answer to how future space traffic around the moon will be managed has not yet been developed. Is this single impact a first warning of hundreds of future collisions to come, or will it remain an extraordinary event in history? The answer lies in our final chapter. When all the evidence is considered together, the true picture of the event becomes clear. Verified fact. In 2025, a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket successfully sent Firefly Aerospace's Blue Ghost and iSpace's Resilience lunar missions onto their planned trajectories. After completing its mission, the second stage, upper stage, no longer had enough fuel or control capability to return to Earth. Over the following months, the gravitational influence of Earth and the Moon gradually altered its trajectory, and on August 5, 2026, it impacted a region near the Moon's Einstein crater. Based on currently available public information, this was not a launch failure, not a secret military operation, and not a mysterious unknown object. Instead, it was the inevitable final journey of a discarded component from a successful space mission. But this event reminds us of an even bigger truth. Humans are no longer changing only Earth's orbit. We are also beginning to alter the space environment around the Moon. And that is why the future of space exploration will not only be about discovering new worlds, it will also be about taking responsibility for every object we leave behind. A new crater formed on the Moon's surface may eventually disappear among countless other impacts over time. But this event on August 5, 2026, will be remembered in history for a different reason. Because it has shown that human space exploration is not only opening new frontiers, it is also creating new responsibilities. Today, an abandoned rocket has impacted the Moon. Tomorrow, the Moon may become home to research facilities, mining projects, and even permanent human settlements. Then the question will no longer be only, who reached the Moon? The question will become, how responsibly has humanity learned to use space? What do you think? Should every rocket traveling into deep space be required to have a safe disposal plan in the future? Share your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes, the greatest mystery is not a lost civilization, but a future that we are creating ourselves. And those unseen stories of the future are exactly what we uncover